Thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate this, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you. A great honor to be the guest speaker today for TLC. I didn't know about TLC until probably last year sometime when Julie first reached out to me and sent me some of the beautiful materials developed by TLC to support end-of-life care and practice for Vajrayana practitioners with applications to really any Buddhist practitioner, but tremendous wisdom from the Vajrayana tradition about how to relate to the end of life and how to relate to the end of life for oneself, but also for one's Sangha members and family members. So uh, I hope that you all learn more about TLC and their wonderful work through their website and through events like this. So I'm delighted to be with all of you today to share a piece of wisdom that has been incredibly inspiring to me for many decades. I have been at Naropa for a very long time, and our MDiv program at Naropa began in 2001. And so I've spent the last couple of decades involved in training chaplains, Buddhist chaplains, for work in a variety of fields. And I'll talk a little bit later about chaplain training and some of the work that I'm doing at Naropa with my colleagues, but also with my colleagues across the country who are training Buddhist chaplains in beautiful ways. And I see a couple of those people with us today. It's wonderful to see you, my dear friends in the Buddhist chaplaincy world. Many years ago, early in my teaching career at Naropa, part of my job has been to teach Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist scripture and Buddhist practice to our undergraduate and our graduate students. And so even before the MDiv program began, I looked around for what would be the kind of particularly Mahayana sutras that would be most compelling for my students to really teach the heart of the Bodhisattva path. And early on, I came across the translation by Robert Thurman of the holy teaching of Vimalakirti. Vimalakirti is a great bodhisattva who lived at the time of the Buddha. And this is a sutra that lays out the bodhisattva path and the Mahayana view of how to be in the world. And this text grabbed me the first time I read it. First time I read it, which was probably 1980, I thought, you could make this into a stage play or a musical even, because there's so much drama and beauty in the sutra that's very relatable. So over the years, as I've taught the sutra, I've been particularly drawn by one chapter in the sutra. So at this point, I'm going to begin my PowerPoint and talk about the wisdom of this sutra, particularly in one chapter, chapter 5. The sutra teaches us how to be with illness, how to be with illness in ourselves, and how to be with illness with others. So let me go at this point to my PowerPoint. After this PowerPoint, we're going to have a discussion about the wisdom of Vimalakirti. And then a little later, I'll talk about chaplaincy altogether. So I hope you can see this. It's working for people. You can see the screen all right? Okay, excellent. So present at the bedside, the wisdom of Vimalakirti. Oops, let's see if I can get my screen to work. There we go. So what we're going to begin with is talking about sickness in Buddhist scripture, and then talk a little bit about Buddhist chaplaincy, and then move directly into this sutra. And I have created slogans from the teachings of chapter 5 in my teaching of my chaplaincy students. So I'm going to be sharing those slogans with you today. So first, I wanted to go back to the foundational teachings of Buddhism, where from the very beginning, Buddha Shakyamuni talked about the importance of his monastics, his Buddhist monks and nuns, that they should carry with them four things at all times: a begging bowl, robes, a bed and seat, something to lie on, and medicine. And the reason they were to carry medicine was in order to take care of their own health, but also to have medicine to offer anyone who they encountered who was sick. And the Buddha in the Vinaya, in the monastic text, said that he wanted his monastics, monks and nuns, to care for the sick just as they would care for him if he were sick. He wanted them to be with the sick in the way that they would be with him. And he gave them pointers about how to be with the sick, what kinds of questions to ask, how to be receptive and listen to those who are sick about their sickness, and to give them medicine for their sickness, along with the ultimate medicine of the Dharma. So this is the context that even from the foundational teachings, Buddhists were asked to relate to sickness. And so the Buddha came to be known in the earliest years as the great physician who brought the medicine of the Dharma to all of us who are experiencing suffering of various kinds. I wanted to share with you this photograph of my friend, Venerable Guanzen, Zen Guan, or Guanzen as he's sometimes called. He is a chaplain in the US Army. He's originally from China, but he's an American citizen, and he is right now serving as an Army chaplain. He received his degree in chaplaincy from University of the West, and this is his being sworn in as a chaplain in the US Army. And usually chaplains in the Army are asked to place their hand on the Bible when they take their oath. But Venerable Guanzen instead asked to put his hand on the Vimalakirti Sutra. And so this is a beautiful example of a Buddhist monk who became an Army chaplain, who felt that it was really the teachings of Vimalakirti that were foundational for his chaplaincy in the Army. He served for a period of time. He left, went back to China as a monk, and received a PhD studying chaplaincy, particularly in America. And he now has returned to the United States. And just in the last 6 months, he's re-entered the Army as a chaplain again. So why this sutra? This sutra, it dates from 100 CE, from Sanskrit India. It's a classic Mahayana sutra that is beloved, particularly in East Asia, but also in Central Asia. It's a rare sutra because the main protagonist is a distinguished layman who is a deeply realized bodhisattva. And it is a sutra that speaks very much to lay people in Asia and in the West. My students have loved the sutra for a long, long time. And I was sharing earlier, a group of my students back probably 20 years ago so loved this sutra that they formed a little student-run organization called the Cult of Vimalakirti. And they studied this sutra together with even students who were not in our MDiv program or in our program at all. And every year, once a year, they would do an all-night reading aloud of this sutra, just to take those words very much to heart. So my presentation is going to be going through the sutra, and all of the art in this presentation comes from Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, Korean art depicting Vimalakirti, the great bodhisattva. So here's one of the beloved depictions of Vimalakirti. He's usually depicted in East Asia as an ancient sage with a long beard, influenced, I'm sure, by Taoism. He's depicted as very old. In the sutra itself, there's no age given to Vimalakirti, but given his vitality, one thinks of him as a young person. But in China and Korea especially, he's depicted as an old person. And art of Vimalakirti is found in so many places. So I drew from some of the beautiful art throughout East Asia, especially. Vimalakirti is also important in Tibet, but not as well known. He is especially important in the Dzogchen tradition, in which he is the teacher of King Ja in the higher tantras. And so you find a few depictions of Vimalakirti like this one, where again here he's more depicted as young and prince-like. And but it's important to understand that East Asia and Central Asia is where he's best known. So we're focusing on chapter 5 in the Thurman translation, which in our program we lovingly call this the chaplain's chapter, because it holds the wisdom about sickness and how to be with people who are sick. And I wanted to set the stage for you for this particular sutra. Vimalakirti is an amazing layman who lives in a town. He has a wife, he has children, he has servants. He's very active in civic life. If in contemporary times, he might be somebody who serves on the city council and is a patron of the great civic things like hospitals and libraries and schools. He is known as a very deep Buddhist practitioner, but who joins that practice with everyday life. And it's said that in the way he treats his wife, the way he treats his children, his friends, and other people in his town of Vaishali, he is an exemplary person. And he is so incredibly realized that he is both feared and respected by the disciples and mahasattvas who are close to the Buddha. The Buddha wants somebody to go and give greetings to Vimalakirti, but all of the disciples are afraid because they recount times they met him, and he was so intimidating in his great wisdom and his great skill at being in the world. And they felt they weren't capable of going to Vimalakirti. And so finally, the great Manjushri, esteemed among all of the Buddha's disciples, agrees that he will go visit Vimalakirti. And Vimalakirti hears through the grapevine that the great Manjushri is coming to visit. So he sets up a household that is quite unusual. You could say a very dramatic scene. He creates a household that is empty of furniture except for himself, and he puts himself in bed and makes himself sick as a very, very sick person, with the great Manjushri coming to speak to him. And so it's in the Mahayana, it's viewed as a kind of trap. He's setting a trap for Manjushri because of the Buddhist teachings. Manjushri has to come and be a chaplain to the great Vimalakirti, and to ask the classical questions and to provide medicine of Dharma for Vimalakirti, who is sick in bed. Now, of course, my students always debate, is Vimalakirti really sick, or is he just pretending to be sick? And when we study this part of the Vimalakirti Sutra, my students, we create cushions in the middle of the room, and one student volunteers to be Vimalakirti on the bed, and another student is Manjushri, who comes to sit at his bedside, and we do a dramatic reading of the sutra in a dramatic fashion. The students love this part of the course. So why is this a trap? It's because the Vinaya texts say that monastics and bodhisattvas must go and visit the sick. And here is a depiction of Vimalakirti on his bed in his house, and he is here. He's not lying down, but in the sutra itself, he's lying down as if sick. And then many disciples and bodhisattvas come close to witness the interaction between Manjushri and Vimalakirti. Now, in the Vinaya says that when you visit the sick, these are the questions that you must ask. That is, the Buddha said you don't just show up and preach to someone. You show up at their bedside and you ask them how they feel. And the Mahavagga says you ask these questions. Is your condition tolerable? Is it livable? Are your physical elements not disturbed? Is your sickness diminishing? Is it not increasing? And then the Buddha asks his students to bring greetings from the Buddha. The Buddha asks about you. If you have slight trouble or slight discomfort, slight sickness, if your distress is light, if you're cared for, strong, at ease, without self-reproach, if you are living in touch with the supreme happiness. So the Buddha wanted his disciples to visit sick people and find out how they're doing. And then when they answer, this becomes part of a conversation about sickness and the nature of sickness. Now, everyone was afraid to go visit Vimalakirti because asking these questions of Vimalakirti would open up a profound conversation from Mahayana Buddhism about the true nature of existence. And so this is why this was a mesmerizing scene. Vimalakirti set a trap, and Manjushri comes to sit at his bedside. So there's a dialogue between Manjushri and Vimalakirti. This stele on the right comes from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Whenever I go to New York, I like to go to the Metropolitan and revisit this stele. It's part of a whole bunch of depictions of Vimalakirti in New York City. So the conversation between Manjushri and Vimalakirti is this powerful teaching on sickness and how to be a caregiver to oneself when you're sick and how to be a caregiver to others. So I wanted to let you know that my students have studied this text for many years, and they began to report to me that when they actually were chaplains in hospitals or hospices, they could never remember what Vimalakirti taught. And so what I did is several years ago, I created a series of slogans, very much in the style of Atisha and his slogans. Atisha's 7 Points of Mind Training, compiled by the 12th century Cheikawa Yeshe Dorje, in a series of aphorisms that are easy to remember, that one could carry with you to the bedside of someone who's sick, or to carry with you to yourself when you're sick. And these are the Vimalakirti slogans. Again, I'm humbly offering these. It was a little cheeky of me to make slogans of this kind, but they're helpful to me and my students. And if you have any edits to offer at some point, that would be good. So the first slogan, sickness is an intrinsic part of living. Vimalakirti begins his teaching reminding us of the Four Noble Truths and the truth of suffering. And of course, all of us who've studied the Four Noble Truths know that one of the foundations of the truth of suffering is the truth of the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death. But Vimalakirti chooses to focus only on sickness as a kind of emblem of all of the other aspects of suffering in our world. Basically saying that sickness is foundational in human life. It is something that everyone experiences at some time in their life, and that everyone becomes ill at some time in their life. This is a very personal thing. We recognize that sickness is very foundational. Everyone gets sick at some time. And Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche reminds us that, of course, we're experiencing sickness, not just sickness of body ourselves, but we're experiencing sickness of mind, sickness of life force, sickness of society, and sickness of environment. And when we witness warfare in our world, the warfare going on in Israel and the Hamas, in the Ukraine, when we look at the sickness of climate change and the incredible effects on people, economic disparity, displacement of people and refugees on our shores, all of the difficulties with drugs and overdoses in our society. And here, near the end of a pandemic, we begin to understand that sickness is not just a metaphor, that we experience sickness of body, but we definitely experience sickness of mind, sickness of life force, society, and environment. And one of the things that we find with our chaplains in training is that when we enter the sick room in the hospital or in a private home or in a hospice, there is often an enormous alarm, a feeling that sickness is unnatural and that sickness has singled us out for harm. And there's a feeling of insult to sickness. Often people somehow blame the sick. They say it's because they were smokers or because of lifestyle or because they aren't enlightened enough or whatever. As caregivers, we cannot necessarily change how the patient and the family may feel, but it is essential, as we'll see through all the slogans, that we hold the view that sickness and death are a natural part of life, of everyone's life, and that this is part of being a human being. And if we do not hold this view at the core, it's easy to fall into extremes and make false promises and to be part of some kind of a battleground in the sick room for people who are ill. We need to bring a quality of stability, clarity, and kindness into our outlook as caregivers and to ourselves. So anytime we become ill, it's easy to become incredibly alarmed and feel we have to do something, or this is just our response. And developing a foundational view that sickness is an intrinsic part of living is what it means to be a Buddhist practitioner. This is so important. It's the foundational slogan, and very important to come back to over and over again as we go through the slogans and as we go through caregiving. Okay, the second slogan, the bedside of the patient is the foundation of Buddhist practice. So it's a very powerful thing to sit with someone who is ill, who is dying. It could be terminal illness, it could be chronic illness, it could be any kind of illness. And for the pandemic, these slogans were so powerful. For my student interns, chaplains who were in the hospital during the pandemic, they found these slogans incredibly helpful. Sickness is not just an individual experience. When someone is sick, their whole family is affected and they feel themselves as sick as well. The caregivers are engaged, and we as bodhisattvas place ourselves right in the middle of the lives of beings who are sick. We join them in their suffering. And Vimalakirti says, when he is asked about his sickness, his first response to Manjushri, he says he is sick because all beings are sick, and he will not become well until everyone is well. This is the stance of the Bodhisattva. We aren't fending off illness. We're not fending off the sickness of mind or the pain of climate change, of warfare, of hunger, of poverty, of overdose, all of that. This is something we are participating in as well. We are affected by the sickness of the world, and we're sharing in this reality. This is what it means to be a bodhisattva. And so you might say that being a spiritual caregiver, we're placing ourselves directly in the most natural of human conditions, that we are embedded in caring for those who are sick. This is what it means to be a bodhisattva, that we care in this way. And it reminds me a great deal of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings about interbeing, that we inter-are, and that what's going on in our world affects us as well. So we are full participants in the sickness of the world. And so the bedside of the patient is also the bedside of the world, you could say. We are participating in it with them. The third slogan is contemplating sickness brings spiritual depth. This is a really powerful thing as we begin to respond to how do we feel about sickness and how do we respond to sickness. This is a powerful thing. First of all, sickness is personal. When we are sick ourselves, it's personal. When a member of our families is sick, it is personal. And so taking it personally means that we're not just creating some kind of fantasy world where sickness is a kind of abstract thing. It is something that we carry very much into the heart of our practice. I wanted to share with you that 7 weeks ago, I had knee replacement surgery, and I went through, the stages. The knee replacement is a very, very challenging thing to recover from because of the stages. The first 2 weeks are all about managing pain and managing opioids that they give you immediately after surgery and beginning to get active. The second 2 weeks are all about brutal physical therapy and how you have to stretch this new limb and bend it. And they bring out an intense satanic protractor every time you go to the doctor, making sure you're bending your knee further and further and further. And then the third 2 weeks is all about being able to walk further and further and further. So I've been contemplating my state of mind recovering from knee replacement surgery while preparing this talk today, and realizing that when you're injured or sick, and certainly I think a lot of us experienced this during the pandemic, what happens is the world begins to shrink into me. And it's very difficult to expand your world to others. It begins to focus very much on managing me. And you begin to realize, and whenever I am sick and during my recovery from my knee replacement, I've been contemplating Vimalakirti a lot, that the challenge is when the world shrinks to me, how can we begin to relate to all the others who are experiencing a similar sickness, a similar struggle with managing opioids, getting off them as quickly as possible, the incredible pain of a limb being replaced, or anyone who's sick with any kind of illness. How do we do that? And how do we relate to the mind that is looking for a way to make the pain go away? So this is a very important part of bringing spiritual depth. Buddhaghosa said that when we encounter suffering personally, it is natural to look for its causes. It's natural to immediately look, where did this come from and how could we bring this suffering to an end? And when somebody close to us is suffering, we do the same. How can we help them feel better, and how can we find the causes and bring this suffering to an end? So as we go into those kind of natural contemplations that all humans do, this is bringing spiritual depth to us, recognizing there's no single cause of sickness. There's no single cause of pain. The causes are complex, and they go back to the most personal aspects of our experience. And if we don't deeply contemplate sickness and death in this way, we cannot be effective caregivers for ourselves or for others. And so contemplating this in Vimalakirti's chapter gives rise to many of these questions here on the screen about how do we control our own minds in the process? How do we console others who are sick? What kind of treatment can we bring? What is liberation? What is bondage? It feels to me Vimalakirti understands sickness and pain in such a personal way, and he's training us to do the same. Slogan 4. The compassionate caregiver directly experiences their clients' sicknesses. So Vimalakirti says, first of all, feel the suffering of others without hesitation. Don't distance yourself from their suffering. Join in. View the person who is with you like your only child. And you, because they're sick, you're sick as well. Because they are suffering, you're suffering as well. And it's so personal how Vimalakirti talks about this. He himself is a father. He is a parent. And he says, just as when your child is sick, everyone in the family is sick. That is how you feel. I think many of us have had family members who have been ill. My daughter, Alicia, who is 33, when she was 12, she mysteriously became sick for 2 years. She was too ill to attend school for 2 years. And I took her to 26 doctors. I fell prey to a mother's panic about what can you do to help your child. And I went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and they really couldn't help very much. Eventually, she was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, and then later she gradually got well. I was counseled by my Buddhist teachers that this is not a sickness that is going to ruin her life, that it's going to bring enormous depth to her, and she will get well. She got well, and then in her 20s, she became incredibly ill again, what turned out to be Lyme disease. She has chronic Lyme disease. And I think about my panic as a mother trying to find help and support for my daughter, and feel Vimalakirti's teachings about the importance of taking the sickness seriously and look for the causes of sickness, but also recognize the importance of a steady mind. And I have fallen off that over and over again as my daughter has battled Lyme disease. And when she starts to get sick, I can feel the panic. And I feel Vimalakirti saying, yes, join in the suffering of your child, but also keep a steady mind. So that has been a really important teaching for me. It's probably one of the reasons why this teaching has been such an important part of my life. So slogan 5 begins to give us advice about what do we say to console the sick? How do we actually help someone else who's sick? The first 4 slogans are how to be with someone who's sick, and now how can you help them? And this one is incredibly helpful to me. He says, consoling the sick is the practice of the middle way, because when we are trying to help someone who's sick, it's easy to fall into extremes. We can fall into extremes of feeling that the worst will happen and that, everything's going down the tubes, or we can promise that they're going to get better. So I'm paraphrasing Vimalakirti's teaching. The compassionate caregiver does not hold out false hope nor feed false fear. Instead, they're realistic. This is incredible teaching. That is, we don't tell someone who is terminally ill that they're going to get well. Holding out false hope causes harm, but feeding false fear is also harmful. So These are the teachings that Vimalakirti gives. He says that we need to remind ourselves and others the body is impermanent. That sickness and death are a natural part of life. But we should not reject or dishonor the body. You have to read this chapter in order to get the full flavor of what he says about not holding out false hope nor feeding false fear. So he says, to understand the body, it's natural for the body to grow old, to get sick, and to die. And aches and pains, chronic illness is probably going to be with someone for the rest of their life. That's just how it goes. The body is tender, alive, and responsive. It's a key to its sacredness. It's important in the midst of that to keep a steady mind. That is, our minds are deeply affected by what's happening with our bodies, but we can have a healthy mind even while our bodies are dying. We can have a healthy mind even when our bodies are chronically ill. And we can only do so much to treat sickness, but we can work with healthiness in our minds always. Our minds are able to develop depth and wisdom and steadiness in the face of illness. So this is so much the path of the practitioner. So as we work with how to console the sick, it's very important not to fall into these extremes, or when we fall into the extremes, go back to the first slogan: sickness is an intrinsic part of human life. So another thing they say is there are no permanent cures, that we might get over one thing and then something else will make us sick. So this is just something we're going to be relating to for the rest of our lives. And I think for many of us, as we get older, we begin to recognize this. Slogan 6. It's essential that the caregiver work with their own mind. So it's important here for the caregiver. By the way, on the right is this wonderful encounter between Vimalakirti and Shariputra, who's one of the observers. This also is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I hope sometime you have a chance to see some of these beautiful works of art. So it's important that the Buddhist chaplain constantly contemplate the nature of sickness personally and universally in order to be a support for those who are sick. So it's very important, as Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche says. I love this quote from him. He says, "You are ill if you cling to the idea of a self. You are ill if you imagine that the self is true, present, and alive. From the point of view of these two bodhisattvas, our tendency to cling to what illness really is. That is, this is when we understand that there is no inherent existence to any of us, reminding ourselves of absolute bodhicitta and reminding ourselves of the impermanence of our own lives, and that within this life, great joy is found in the impermanent manifestations we experience as we go. So it's very important for us constantly to contemplate the Mahayana teachings of ultimate emptiness of all phenomena and the relative appearance and constantly changing quality of appearance. This is important. And it follows directly slogan 7. Attachment leads to burnout. This is about remaining in the ambiguity of the middle way, learning to remain in compassion, which does not fall into attachment. This is one of the really profound teachings in the sutra, where the sutra talks about how if we become too attached to beings, if we're too attached to ourselves, if we're too attached to others, we can fall into a sentimentality, that a sentimental compassion that leads to burnout in many lifetimes. So This is the importance of practicing the right view as a Buddhist chaplain. Clarity about the true nature of beings as empty appearances. And this is a very important part of the sutra teachings, and it beautifully accords with the current compassion research at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, the research of Tanya Singer and Olga Klemecki. One of the things that I've been involved with in recent years is the Compassion Initiative at Naropa University, and I've become very connected to compassion research. And what they found is that when we fall into empathy, it's natural to become empathetic with others. Empathy is defined as the initial emotional resonance to the suffering of others, where we naturally feel and understand the experience of others. But empathy can lead to sentimental attachment, and we begin to feel overly concerned, attached to outcomes with our patients and clients and friends. And this can lead to an overload and burnout. And they've done brain research where they've shown that in the centers of the brain where empathy is, empathy can tolerate only so much feeling with others. And then those centers of the brain shut down and objectify the other person. So it's very difficult to be present with them at the bedside. So Tanya Singer and Olga Klemecki, working with Mathieu Ricard, doing compassion meditation, found that when we begin doing compassion meditation like Tonglen or loving kindness practice, then we activate a different center of the brain that is able to stay engaged with the suffering of others with an active desire to relieve the suffering of others that is not filled with attachment, but is more filled with joy and stamina and generosity. And so people who are able to move from empathy to compassion, and particularly compassion practice, are able to stay engaged and present at the bedside in a way that a merely empathetic person cannot. And so Tanya Singer and Olga Klemecki have said, we don't have compassion fatigue if we're actually practicing compassion. We have empathy fatigue when we only feel the suffering of another person, but we don't engage in order to help them overcome it. And so attachment is a frozen state. Compassion is a dynamic state where we take on the suffering of others and we extend to them constant wish for them to overcome their suffering. And so this slogan is very much in accord with contemporary science. In the sutra, it says that the bodhisattva avoids sentimentality by understanding the true nature of beings, seeing them as truly, if we see them as truly existent, permanent, unitary beings, it leads to conventional attachment. But great compassion that does not subscribe to concepts of existence and permanence become free of sentimentally purposive views that exhaust the bodhisattva in his incarnations. So this is an ancient sutra that is completely up to date according to contemporary compassion science. So we have only 2 slogans left, and then we'll have a discussion. Let me keep going. Slogan 8 returns to the caregiver and says that our job is to join the clarity of mind that sees the true nature of phenomena with the compassionate engagement at the bedside. This is effective caregiving. Wisdom that sees body, mind, and sickness realistically, constantly reminding ourselves that sickness is an intrinsic part of life. And skillful means that we stay engaged without becoming sentimentally attached to others or indulging in false hope and false fear. So this is a constant practice for the caregiver, a constant dynamic practice. And it means Vimalakirti Sutra says not overly controlling our minds, nor indulging our minds. freeing our minds to be present and responsive to the suffering of others. It also means never abandoning others. So these verses are beautiful in the sutra. And then the final slogan is a reminder. And I love that we can remind ourselves that the practice of attending to sickness is relating to the core of our human life, a fundamental inquiry into the meaning, connection of confusion and wakefulness, that we can pursue the path of caregiving is not just some kind of practice for others. It's practice for oneself, it's practice for those who are sick, and it's a practice for everyone. It becomes a kind of universal path. So the sickness is an emblem of all that is difficult in samsara, and contemplation of sickness epitomizes the path of the bodhisattva. So there's a kind of enduring wisdom in our experience relating to sickness that encompasses all of our practice of bodhisattva. I'm very struck by a teaching of Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who, by the way, has given some amazing teachings on Vimalakirti on YouTube, extensive teachings on Vimalakirti. And he said, when we attempt to use spiritual teachings to remove the fear of sickness, our spirituality can become a sickness as well. So I want to say that again. When we attempt to use spiritual teachings to remove the fear of sickness, our spirituality becomes a sickness as well. And he says, thinking we have something to purify, remove, or change is also a sickness. That is, he's inviting us to dive into the path of relating to sickness and not try to use it as a band-aid, but to see it as a full path. So just in summary, this is from the Vimalakirti Sutra. And again, this is slightly, the wording can be a little hard to comprehend, which is why I went to slogans. But the sutra says, the domain of conformity to all things utterly pure in nature, that is the absolute view, while manifesting behavior that suits the inclinations of all living beings, which is being a caregiver, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. So I'm going to pause there for a discussion of what I've presented so far. Enough time for PowerPoint for now. We'll go back and look at chaplaincy in a moment.
We have 3 questions here. The first, past experience in a Buddhist community showed me that when people are ill or when they're dying, the community tends to back off. This isolates those who are ill and their families who need more support than ever. What are your suggestions to practically work with and change this habitual reaction?
Oh, yes, this is so familiar because this is what non-Buddhist communities do as well. The sort of knee-jerk thing is feel you don't know what to say, you don't know how to show up, and that kind of thing. I think that contemplating these teachings of Vimalakirti, contemplating the teachings on death and dying in Buddhism, and particularly creating in my own sangha, we have care circles of people who have as their practice showing up at the bedside of those who are sick and those who are dying and creating care circles around them, helping them create a household that's peaceful if people are at home dying, going to the hospital and all, and creating an environment where people feel they can come in and they don't have to be experts on how to take care of the sick. I think conversation circles about this are really important. And these care circles, I think if there's anything, in my community, there often are people who show up when you're sick and dying who may not show up when you're having other troubles. There's a, an interesting way that in my community, that's sort of how people have learned to show up for each other, but not necessarily when people are going through a divorce or a loss of a job or other kinds of difficult life events. But I think it might be an interesting conversation, and perhaps playing the videos on the TLC website for conversations, in creating a Sangha gathering once a week to contemplate how could we make caregiving part of our practice, because it's not easy for any of us. But once it becomes part of our practice, it is so deep and inspiring. It's such a powerful, powerful journey.
The second one is regarding slogan 5, how does the chaplain address the family members of the sick who are speaking false hopes and false fears?
This is always a challenge, isn't it? I think that listening and mirroring back things they say without affirming the false hope and the false fear, uh, ourselves holding the middle way, we cannot become correctors of their view. We cannot scold them, but we can hold in some kind of ambiguity the false fear and the false hope. And especially for the ill person themselves, it's phenomenal, having been at the bedside of Sangha members and family members who have died, how powerful it is when you can be with someone who's dying who doesn't know, the family members and the doctors feeling they can't tell the person they're dying, and how powerful it is to sit with the person and be able to very simply affirm that they're dying. And the potency of honesty in that kind of situation, the gentle presence with the truth of the ambiguity of the middle way, is it speaks just as the Dharma speaks. And I think that, of course, these extreme views are there in family members, and they are often carried by the dying person, but often the dying person knows. Uh, Often the person with a chronic illness knows that they will have this illness for the rest of their life. So I think the way we do it is not by preaching, but by mirroring and holding in ambiguity any kind of false fear and false hope, that holds that as a kind of possible statement, but not as a truth, that the truth is somewhere in between.
Thank you. How would you assist a dying person who has vascular dementia and was not particularly religious, but is now worried about God's judgment?
Oh boy. That was true about my mother as she was dying. And I listened, uh, and uh, and also with my father. That was an interesting thing. I was a chaplain to my father, who was a minister. My father was a Methodist minister, and he was very fearful. And I held him in my arms and kept telling him, he was dying of congestive heart failure. I held him in my arms, and I kept saying very gently into his ear to let go into the loving arms of Christ. And it was very interesting. My father looked at me, his Buddhist daughter, Buddhist chaplain, and recognized that there was this kind of connection, that yes, this is how he would die. And I think we can't reason with someone. We can only hold them in the greatest tenderness and allow them to relax into the loving arms. And very often our love can convey something that they cannot conceive from God. That kind of love is something that we can surround people in. I think that particularly if someone is falling into dementia, reasoning is not going to help, but love can help, can support them in that way.
And this next question is along the same lines. Any advice for dealing with a friend's fear of dying?
And if our own fear of dying as well. I think this is something we can't reason with them, but listening deeply. And I know that various people I have known who were dying asked me many questions and asked for readings and things that could comfort them. There are such marvelous sources in the Buddhist tradition. The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It's interesting. My mother found when scripture wouldn't help her, she turned to the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying for comfort. And as a Christian, she found great comfort in that. I think that understanding that death is the fear of death is something that's very deeply embedded in our human life, and that the way through fear, the way beyond fear is through fear, rather than to discount it or telling people not to be afraid. It's being there with them in that kind of very present way, in a comforting way, holding them in their fear, being present with them in their fear. So many times people are alone or they're surrounded by people who refuse to acknowledge what they're going through. And just being present with them is an incredible comfort. Again, love, surrounding people with love.
Here's one. I'm old enough to always detect some level of pain. What advice do you have about distinguishing awareness of pain to release it and have compassion for others in pain or who are dying, and being overly aware of myself? Is it same technique? Is it the same technique as being an instructor and opening to the student so that I can have an authentic response?
My goodness, there are layers in that question. I'm not sure I can answer it simply. What immediately comes to mind is one of my dear friends is Pema Chodron, and many of you know of Pema Chodron's work. And what many of you may not know is Pema has, throughout her long life of practice and teaching, has chronic illness and physical pain every single day. And I often feel about the depth and relatability of her spiritual teaching has come from her daily working with pain, which she doesn't really talk about. But I know for her, and this has been helpful to me, she has said that the most powerful thing in her own life is she dedicates her own experience of pain to relieving the pain of others. And she says every day, may I feel this pain so that others who have, she especially back pain, she is just, she started out with other chronic illnesses and now it's just terrible, terrible back pain. She dedicates that she could feel the pain fully so that others would not have to feel pain. And so she experiences her pain fully for the benefit of others and dedicates that her feeling the pain fully would mean that others do not have to suffer with this pain as well. And so I have found this really helpful just going through this surgery with pain of, may I experience this pain in my surgical knee so that, by the way, I have a collection of people going through knee replacement right now. They're my buddies, and I dedicate that my pain would mean that they won't have to experience pain so strongly. And I think this is a really powerful bodhisattva practice.
And there's one more question. One can mention that while it is natural to avoid pain, if you occasionally notice how you feel about your pain or the pain of others in your family, you can gradually learn how to be not quite as distant than you previously were.
That's
That's
beautiful. That's a beautiful piece of wisdom. Would you read that again?
yeah, that's not a question.
Not a question, it's a piece of wisdom. Let's hear it again.
One can mention that while it is natural to avoid pain, if you occasionally notice how you feel about your pain or the pain of others in your family, you can gradually learn how to be not quite as distant than you previously were.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's what I was trying to convey and what I was saying about how my dear friend Pema works with her pain. And pain, you can open to pain, and opening to pain changes pain, as we all have experienced. It's our resistance to pain that makes it so unbearable. When John Kabat-Zinn began uh, this mindfulness-based stress reduction program, he started out by working with pain patients in the hospital and found that if they could become mindful of pain, it radically changed their experience of pain. And I think all of us have that avenue. If we tune into the pain and become fully mindful and give up the resistance and fight and fear that pain generates, pain changes in how it manifests for us. So this is deeply embedded in the Buddhist teachings and a very powerful reminder for all of us. So
We have,
perhaps, yes.
we have one more. Sorry, just came in. Any advice on how to be a better listener?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, mindfulness training is excellent for that because so often when we are with someone, we're rehearsing what we're going to say and we miss the heart of what they say. So mindfulness is all about stopping the mental chatter and listening, not just with our ears, but with our whole bodies to others. And it's a beautiful thing about mindfulness practice, about how it's helped us learn to listen. One of the things I loved about my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, his power of hearing the question behind the question when I ask questions. And he was famous for this. So when he answered my questions, I felt like he was speaking to something deep in me that wasn't just the question itself. That was such a potent thing. And so, yes, that's part of our being present at the bedside of the world, being at the present at our own bedside as well. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and talk a little bit about Buddhist chaplaincy today. One of the most beautiful things that's been happening is that many longtime Dharma practitioners are learning how powerful the path of caregiving, spiritual caregiving is. And so more and more longtime Buddhist practitioners are becoming caregivers, sometimes as volunteers and sometimes as professionals, professional chaplains. So I wanted just to talk a little bit about chaplaincy today. And I wanted to start out talking a little bit about our Naropa MDiv program. We have a Masters of Divinity program. We sort of smile at the fact that it's called a divinity program, given Buddhist view about non-theism, but divinity in the Buddhist sense of the ultimate truth and the relative truth. Our program is now 22 years old. We have a 72 credit terminal degree, professional degree for those who want to engage in professional spiritual caregiving. And we teach all these subjects. It's a 3-year degree with many career possibilities. We have graduates in all kinds of fields of chaplaincy. And I'd be delighted to talk with anyone if anyone is interested in Naropa. But their chaplaincy is a broad field. And I wanted to talk broadly about chaplaincy spans many different areas: hospital chaplaincy, hospice chaplaincy. We have graduates who are chaplains in higher education, military chaplaincy, prison chaplaincy, eco chaplaincy, corporate chaplaincy. We have one chaplain who works with corporate America as a spiritual caregiver for a large corporation, and then a number of nonprofit chaplaincy. We have chaplains who work for animal shelters, for example, taking care of employees who are engaged in, you know, euthanasia for animals and such, and taking care of them. So there's a tremendous range of the ways that people have taken their Buddhist chaplaincy into the world. To become a Buddhist chaplain, there's the issue of lineage or religious ordination or certification on the one hand, that is what spiritual lineage you've been trained in, and then the professional credentials. There are many who are volunteer chaplains, but there are also those who become board certified chaplains through the Association of Professional Chaplains. Those who are military chaplains are certified by the Buddhist Churches of America, and there are other authorization channels as well. And then there are training options. There's Sangha-based trainings like TLC, and the Upaya Zen Center, the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care, Rigpa International Sati training. There are probably others that I have not listed here, but there are quite a few sanghas now that are providing training for how to become a chaplain. And then there are these degree programs, and these are just a few. There are more than these, but Naropa University of the West, Maitripa College, Institute of Buddhist Studies, and then larger universities that have, or theological schools that have Buddhist chaplain training programs as part of them. Harvard Divinity School, Union Theological Seminary, University of Chicago Divinity School, Emmanuel College, University of Toronto, and I'm probably missing some here. One Buddhist Institute I forgot to put here, and there are others. But I wanted to call attention to this particular group. We have a network of chaplain educators who train Buddhist chaplains in a variety of institutions. And this is a photograph from our April gathering. I'm in this, but so is Lee, who will be speaking in a moment. But these are other chaplains from a variety of schools who are engaged in Masters of Divinity training of Buddhist chaplains. And we're working together to create greater smoothness for our students who receive training and then go through internships and then want to become board certified and develop professional careers. We're dedicated to making this easier. And this wonderful group of people, we're very tightly bonded in trying to help Buddhist chaplains in the world. And then I wanted to say there's a lot happening in Asia as well. After the Japanese tsunami, many people in Japan were distraught about the many people killed in the tsunami, and they found that many of the Buddhist monastics and priests were simply unprepared to deal with bereavement and pastoral counseling. They're trained in ritual, they're trained in all the rituals you do with the dying, and then funerals. But many of the Asian monastics simply didn't know how to deal with bereavement and preparation for death issues. So there are increasing number of chaplaincy training programs happening in Asia, training lay and ordained chaplains to be able to be pastoral counselors. So there are a variety of gatherings. The photograph down below is from a Columbia University conference, international conference of chaplaincy, where there were people talking about chaplaincy in Japan, Taiwan, China, and Thailand. And I'm sure there are many other places that I have not mentioned, because this is now catching on. Many of these schools and monasteries in Asia are then coming to our universities in North America to learn more about how we train pastoral counselors and that kind of thing. So it's all very exciting. And I also wanted to call attention to a Harvard-funded survey of Buddhist chaplains in America. The resources available through the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. It is a mapping of Buddhist chaplains in North America, and the results of this are coming out more and more. This was sponsored by our Buddhist Ministry Working Group, and it's just very exciting to see how chaplaincy is spreading all over North America, but also in Asia. And this study really gives us a sense about who these chaplains are, what they need in terms of resources, and the wonderful work that they're doing. So I wanted just to open the conversation, and I wanted to invite Lee Miller, who is one of my sisters with the Buddhist Ministry Working Group. And I'm going to scan and see if there are others from our BMWG in this audience. But I wonder, Lee, if there's anything you'd like to say about the field of Buddhist chaplaincy and how it's spreading. And thank you so much for being here today.
Good morning.
There we go. Lee, hi.
Hello. Thank you so much, Judith, for this wonderful presentation. I've taken so many notes. Beautiful. Also, the artwork, gorgeous. And I love the slogans and hearing about how you use those. And thanks to TLC for hosting this event and for unmuting me. And thank you, Judith, for inviting me to share with you. I know people didn't come here to hear me, so I'll keep it really short.
Please, no, I'm representing a whole network of people. I'm so glad you're here to speak from our network.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we have an amazing consortium or sangha of Buddhist spiritual care educators around the country, and we are formalizing into a national organization within the next year or so. I think that's going to be really exciting for sharing the resources across our lineages and helping to enhance the education and training we offer to students and to chaplains in the field who would like to draw on multiple Buddhist traditions or the insights of Dharma, wisdom and practice professionally and educationally. I would say what each of our schools work quite beautifully together in sharing resources and ideas and sense of community. But we also have our unique differences that make us specialized in particular ways, which is also quite beautiful and reflects some of the diversity of Buddhism in this country and internationally and over time, but just a small slice of that diversity. I'd say my Tripa College in Portland, Oregon is particularly unique because we are very grounded in the Tibetan Gelugpa Buddhist lineage, going back to Tsongkhapa, and our founder and president and the teacher of our philosophy and meditation classes is Yangtze Rinpoche, who wrote Practicing the Path and other teachers all over the world. So the students in the Maitripa program are very grounded in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and integrated with meditation practice on those same topics. And then we have our service curriculum, our service learning curriculum, where we help people to bridge that philosophy and personal contemplative practice with how they will be and what they will do in the world. So how they're going to manifest and enact that, embody it in the actual service to other sentient beings or mother sentient beings. And the chaplaincy and spiritual care part of Maitripa comes mainly through the MDiv program, which we founded in 2010. I'd say something like 90% of our MDiv graduates are working chaplains, mostly in hospice, bereavement coordinating, bereavement counseling, and healthcare chaplaincy. But we're looking to help them broaden as chaplaincy becomes more visible in the country during and since the pandemic. And I just saw yesterday on the New York Times list of best movies of 2023, the number 5 film was about chaplain interns. Times best chaplains. It wasn't Buddhist chaplain particularly, but it was chaplains. And, you know, we're kind of used to, I think probably Judith and I are used to walking into a place and saying we're a chaplain and people go, what? What's that? And now we have a movie about chaplains on the New York Times best movies list. So I think the field is going to be growing in general, but definitely more and more Buddhists looking for ways to practice the teachings of right livelihood and ways to make their practice on the cushion come alive in their relationships and in their service with others and all kinds of suffering. And I think the pandemic has shown us the suffering of systemic racism, the suffering of grief, the suffering of climate is with us constantly, and more people are affected by it, as you were mentioning, Judith. So yeah, I think it's going to continue to grow, as you mentioned. So if anyone would like to know more about the field or my chipa, I'm happy to be in touch.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being here today, Lee. And so at this point, we'll go to questions from the audience and see what comes up.
The first thing is wanting to know the name of the film that was just mentioned.
A Still Small Voice.
Oh, I haven't heard about this, so this is great.
Then, wonderful. Following this, the question, which Buddhist chants are helpful for the suffering and those in transition?
My own experience is it depends a lot on who you're sitting with. There are, in my own community, as I sit with members of my own community, we chant, there are classic things we chant. We chant the Heart Sutra, which is a classic, helpful one for learning to let go. But we also have been given instruction by our teacher from chants from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Todo, which we use in the transitions for members of our community. On the other hand, there are some people who are from different Buddhist lineages. The students who come to Naropa, some of them are Tibetan Buddhist, but we also have Zen Buddhists, we have Vipassana practitioners, we have people who have a more sort of American Buddhist identity and have less experience with an Asian teacher. And so what we train our students to do is to take their cues from the patient they're sitting with and to identify what their own spiritual lineages are. Our MDiv graduates have developed prayer books from many different traditions of practices to do with various people. And we have beloved chants from Milarepa as well, for our own lineage. And we have compositions from our teachers, Trungpa Rinpoche, Sakya Mipa Rinpoche, that are incredibly beautiful reminders of the transmissions people have received and how to prepare for and how to let go at the time of death. But it would probably not be appropriate to be reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead at the bedside of someone who didn't connect with those particular teachings. So for our MDiv program, when we train our students, we're training them for interfaith chaplaincy. And so they are chaplains sometimes for Buddhists and sometimes for, and Buddhists, they are chaplains for Buddhists who may come from longtime ethnic Asian communities where they have their own chants and rituals that are meaningful to them. And we use what is meaningful to the patient. You could never go wrong with the foundational teachings of the Buddha and the Dhammapada and the reminders of impermanence. There are beautiful, beautiful teachings from those as well. So some of our earliest chaplain graduates developed anthologies of prayers to use at the bedside of patients, and our current chaplains in training. And we, by the way, in Naropa, we not only have a chaplain training program, we also have an internship program with clinical pastoral education where we supervise chaplains in the hospital, in hospice, while they're doing their internships required for graduation, so that they can bring the contemplative approaches that we teach right into their internship. We have CPE interns on our faculty as well. So they're guided in their internships on how to bring the appropriate practices to the bedside of a patient. The most important thing is presence. And we teach that in our series. Our students go through a series of 4 meditation training practica And then they're all trained as meditation instructors, mindfulness instructors, so they can actually teach mindfulness at the bedside of they're authorized meditation instructors for teaching mindfulness to people who are dying or ill.
And I also wanted to mention, people are probably aware of spiritual care directives. There are some very lengthy ones. TLC has a concise one on our website. And when people fill those out ahead, you will know what they want recited at bedside because they will have told their loved ones, and that's very helpful. So it's another thing, that could be included in this.
Yes, so important. TLC has developed some wonderful resources, especially for the dying. And so, yes, I definitely suggest people go to the website, and the wonderful handbook that I've received from TLC is quite useful.
Well, thank you. Just as a further comment about the film, a Still Small Voice. It was made by a mentor of someone here, another chaplain, Liz Hamill Howard,
Oh,
Meigs Ross and David Flanor, I think maybe is the pronunciation, and it was awarded at the Sundance Film Festival and has been the whole year at independent film festivals in the circuit of that.
oh my, that's wonderful.
It was filmed in New York City at Mount Sinai Hospital and Langone Med School during the 2020 pandemic. So
Wow,
it's
that's
interesting
fantastic.
information.
I think the pandemic has alerted the country alerted the world to how important spiritual caregiving is when you consider all the people who are in the hospital away from their families, deprived of loved ones present at the bedside, and how nurses had to step in and provide the kind of support. And so many chaplains were not allowed into hospital rooms of people dying during the pandemic. I think that this has opened our hearts to the need for spiritual caregiving in hospital and hospice settings. Yeah.
When someone is feeling overwhelmed by how their negative karma has led to their illness, do you have advice on how to help them relax their sense of guilt or negative self-talk?
I think this is where Buddhist practice comes very, very handy. It sounds like the person who's asking the question is talking about themselves. And then if you're with someone who has this kind of feeling, there's a kind of potency in recognizing that our karma is always a mix of positive and negative. And the power of spiritual practice, the power of mindfulness to awaken one in the present to things from the past that we may regret. And it's never too late to repair and confess those things and to let them go. That quality of opening up to our personal karma in that kind of way, there are very powerful practices in the Vajrayana for this especially, but it can be done by anyone at any time. And the recognition, the openness to acknowledging and confessing using the tradition of the four powers of regret and confession and vowing not to, wishing to repair and vowing not to do things like this again is a very powerful way of purifying at any point in one's life. It doesn't have to just be on one's deathbed, at any point in one's life. And then there's the invitation to be able to rest and relax and really let the whole thing go. So the Buddhist path, and when I think particularly of Shantideva's teachings on the four powers of releasing past negative karma, is just of a constant potent reminder for something that we can do at any time in our lives by genuine regret and confession, and committing to repair and to try to fix what one has done, and then vowing never to do it again, and opening to forgiving oneself. And I think sometimes, being Western Dharma practitioners, we're very much stuck in a guilt tradition. Uh, the quality of guilt I remember that one of our Buddhist Christian dialogue conferences, one of our participants said that guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. We have to, as Buddhist practitioners, learn to release guilt through confession. And I think this tradition of feeling that guilt cannot be released is it's a burden. It's something that simply isn't true when it comes to the core teachings of the Dharma.
This person is very glad that nurses have been brought up, and asks, do you have any advice on how to both support and acknowledge them?
Oh, such an important question. My daughter-in-law is a nurse. Two of my sisters-in-law are nurses. And all of us, as we have gone through the pandemic, have become incredibly aware of how nurses knit together our entire medical system with very little acknowledgement or payment, and very few benefits. And we, I think, have come to understand the kind of generosity and exertion and devotion and service that nurses have brought. I'm happy to hear from my sisters-in-law and from my daughter-in-law that nurses are being paid better, but I'm not sure they're being treated better. And I think it's so important that nurses have unionized and that they are speaking as a body about their needs in order to stay in the profession. So many of them, when they reach the breaking point, just leave nursing. And we need these wonderful, gifted people with such open hearts. And so I think this is a time when unions are really a positive thing. And I think also, just as we go through healthcare systems, to thank every nurse we encounter for their service, their care, their compassion, their skill.
Yes. Here's another question. As we examine our minds and habits and notice our faults, like a personal inventory.
Yes.
Is it as important? It is as important to recognize our qualities. How do we bring these aspects of the self into balance?
Oh, so important, because our Western culture has been so bogged down by exaggerated senses of our inadequacy, our negativity, that we're basically bad. And this what I've learned from some of my Christian theological friends is that the exaggerated sense of original sin is really a heresy in Christianity and in Abrahamic religions. This ability to see the fundamental goodness in ourselves and in others, to see goodness no matter what faults we may have, whatever mistakes we've made, there is underneath it a fundamental awakened brilliance about who we are. And one of the powers of working with suffering is, as suffering begins to be very much part of our experience, it helps us break down some of the barriers to seeing the beauty of life, the beauty of others, the gift of life experience. And that experience of beauty comes shining through in many extreme experiences of our lives. So I think that the gift of Buddhist teachings, and Mahayana teachings in particular, has been to point out the fundamental bodhicitta, awakened nature at the heart of every being, or to put it in a third turning sense of the Buddha nature, the enlightened brilliance at the heart of each of us, it's that brilliance that sees the problems, but it's more important to see that those problems exist as skies, as clouds against a brilliant sky. And that's so important. It's one of the benefits of Buddhist practice, in my opinion. I see that Roger has his hand up.
Oh, how do I get my second hand?
Can you see Roger with his hand up?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Can you repeat the quote from Pema Chodron about dedicating her full experience in her pain and dedicating it for the benefit of others?
Yes. I'm afraid it's not an exact quote, but what she says she does is that when she experiences incredible pain, what she does is she visualizes other beings in pain throughout the world, and she has a long Tonglen list. Inspired by her, I keep little 3x5 cards of Tonglen people to do one breath for each day. She has endless lists. What she does is she breathes in the pain and she says, may I feel this pain fully so that these others don't have to feel pain. May I be able to let this pain in and feel it, and so that they don't have to have pain like this in their experience. And that's what she does every day. I think it's her main practice.
Okay.
Okay, Roger?
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you.
So Julie, are there any other questions?
Yes, someone's asked, how can we read chapter 5, the one that you've been referring to throughout this, in full? How do we find this text?
Okay, the book is called The Holy Teaching of Vimalakirti. It was published 40 years ago, so it's been around by State University of Pennsylvania Press, and written by Robert Thurman. You can order it on Amazon. And one thing I wanted to say is that I've agreed to share my PowerPoint with TLC, which will appear on the website. You may find the reading of the sutra, the language might seem a little hard to understand, but maybe if you read the sutra, chapter 5, along with my slogans, maybe they will come clear. And so I'm very happy to share these slogans on the TLC website. And then you could read them along with Vimalakirti. And the Vimalakirti Sutra as a whole is just incredible. It's full of florid miracles. It's full of dialogues. It has all kinds of characters. It has a whole chapter on seeing through the prejudice against gender and seeing that female bodhisattvas are sometimes superior to male bodhisattvas in understanding gender. So it's full of all kinds of very contemporary issues as well. So good luck with that. But it's published by State University Press. It's been in nonstop publication for the last 40 years, and it needs no updating. It's definitely a beautiful text.
Here's someone who's asking for some advice about volunteering with a chemotherapy unit.
Oh, there are all kinds of opportunities in hospitals to work as volunteers. Usually there is training, or if you wanted to volunteer for a hospice, many hospices have training as well. So you could approach the hospital or hospice and ask if there's an opportunity to be a volunteer. They may not be allowing you to be a chaplain per se. There may be other ways you can help. But many hospitals and hospices have a really helpful training for being a volunteer. And many of our students who have come to pursue the path of becoming a professional chaplain have first been hospital or hospice volunteers, and were so moved by the experience that then they have decided to get a Master's of Divinity degree. So it's a great place to start to see if this is something you would like to do. If the hospital won't take you as a volunteer, then go to your local hospice and ask if you could be a volunteer and if you could go through their training. They usually ask for a length of time commitment. They'll ask if you'll serve for 2 years as a volunteer because they're investing a lot of training in you. And so it's not something to be taken lightly because they're investing training.
We have some more questions. Regarding the care groups, I've noticed a similar dynamic among my various sanghas. People show up for sickness and death, but not necessarily when someone is going through a difficult situation. Could the care groups consider including the emotional and mental difficulties people go through as one of the different types of sickness mentioned by Vimalakirti, and thereby expand their service to their Sangha members? Sometimes people just need someone to listen or be present to help them through a challenging situation.
I think that's excellent. And I've introduced the conversation in my Sangha to a greater or lesser extent. People are still magnetized by sickness, but particularly terminal illness. And so what I've decided to do and have been doing for some time is just taking the time myself to spend time with people who are having difficulty and just take it on ourselves. It's hard to talk other people into things. Often we can just take the lead, and that when we have done it and we find it very meaningful, it often helps other people get going. In our system of meditation instructors in my community, often the meditation instructors will go and be with someone having a hard time as well. So I think compassion is contagious, and if we join in, and there's a quality of kind of energized presence that comes from compassionate activity. I think that's a good thing.
And here we have, how do you deal with a loved one who has made a firm decision about PAS, physical assisted suicide?
Yes, and that's been something that's come up in our community as well, that there are Sangha members who've made a decision for assisted suicide. And personally, I have found that some of them have wanted to talk with me first, and I have gone over with them why they've made the decision and the pros and cons. When somebody is terminally ill and not far from death, I have not wanted to disturb things by talking them out of it, but more airing all the things that they are considering and supporting them in whatever decision they make. I know that that's not so doctrinally correct in Tibetan Buddhism, but it's become something that has been very meaningful for members of my community who have chosen that particular route. Just last night, I was talking with one of my closest Dharma friends about how each of us feels about that. And I can understand how someone who is within weeks of dying might choose a more dignified way of dying. It's not something that I feel that I could choose, but I also am not sure how I would feel in that situation myself. So I think this is an active conversation in many Dharma communities these days, if you are in a state that allows such things. And it's an active conversation in my own large community, and I know people who've chosen one direction and others who've chosen another direction.
A question is, are there any of the anthologies of chants that were mentioned as having been developed for use by chaplains Are they available for others?
They are not published, and they're sort of passed around informally among my students. So unfortunately, I would have to say no. Um, this would be, the field of Buddhist chaplaincy needs more resources published to support it. And one of the tasks our Buddhist Ministry Working Group is working on is how to develop more resources for Buddhist chaplains to use in their chaplaincy work. And I think this is an anthology of Buddhist prayers to go along with, those of other religions would be incredibly helpful. I just last night I saw the young man who developed this anthology, and I'll be seeing him again today at the teachings I'm about to go to, and maybe I'll suggest to him that he publish these and share them more broadly.
As a certified music practitioner for healing and transition, I am grateful for the increasing awareness and assistance for befriending sickness and death on this journey. And this is at mhtp.org for those who are interested.
Oh, how lovely.
As a longtime hospice nurse, about 3/4 of my patients initially expressed their interest in physician-assisted suicide. But once their physical pain was controlled and the family was supported, their interest in this simply dissolved, and they were able to relax into their dying process at the end.
That's a beautiful offering. Thank you so much for saying that. Um, and I think that often that's the case. I know that some of my Sangha brothers and sisters who have chosen assisted suicide, it hasn't been pain so much as their wish to be conscious and aware at the point of their dying. And so, yes, but I think pain is definitely a motivating factor for many people. So at this point, I'd like to close with my own dedication of merit from my community. In our community, we do all of our practices in English, and so we're very English based in our practice. And then the TLC organization will close with their dedication of merit. But I wanted first just to thank you all so much for coming. I feel like this whole field of Buddhist chaplaincy is not known much about, and yet it provides such a path for so many people. I see Penny Rather is present, who is our very first MDiv graduate and has been a Buddhist chaplain, a Unitarian Buddhist chaplain for a long, long time. And Penny, is so nice to see you here on the screen. I haven't seen you in so long. And I'm seeing other longtime Sangha friends on the screen as well. This is marvelous to see you here. So if I could ask you to join me in, as we always, dedicate the merit of whatever that has happened here that is of benefit for anyone. We would like this benefit to extend out to all beings so that somehow we could, through our practice and through our service, have some role in turning back the suffering of the world. So, by this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. And now for the TLC people.
May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened.